When people ask me about my story, they always want to know about the revenge part. But honestly, that's not even the most important part. The real story starts way before that. Back when I was just a scared 28-year-old woman trying to figure out how to save something that meant everything to me. My name is Emma, and I guess you could say I never planned to become a brewer. Growing up, I was one of those kids who was always good at school, always following the rules, always trying to make everyone happy. My parents owned this little brewery called Golden Hops. Maybe you've heard of it? Probably not, unless you're really into craft beer. It wasn't huge or anything, just this cozy place in a small town in Colorado where my great-great-grandfather started making beer back in the 1940s. The thing is, our family had this secret. Well, not really a secret. More like a family treasure that nobody else knew about. See, my great-great-grandfather. He was this German immigrant who came over after the war with basically nothing except his knowledge of brewing and this tiny sample of yeast. Not just any yeast, but this incredible strain that his family had been cultivating in Bavaria for generations. I'm talking about yeast that was probably older than most countries. When I was little, I used to follow my dad around the brewery like a lost puppy. He'd explain everything to me. How the barley needed to be malted just right, how the hops had to be added at exactly the right moment, how temperature control could make or break an entire batch. But the real magic happened in our basement at home, where we kept what we called the mother culture. Every week, my dad would take me down there to check on it. This little jar of bubbling, living yeast that looked like absolutely nothing special but was basically the heart of our entire operation. He'd feed it, tend to it, talk to it like it was a pet. I thought he was crazy back then, but now I understand. This wasn't just yeast, it was our family's legacy, literally alive and breathing. Emma, he'd say, this little culture has survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless other disasters. It's tougher than all of us combined, but it needs love and attention to thrive. Just like any relationship. I rolled my eyes at the time, but I was absorbing everything. How to maintain the culture, how to propagate it, how to keep it healthy and active. My dad taught me like he was passing down ancient wisdom, which I guess he was. When I turned 22, I officially joined the brewery. I had a business degree. Mom insisted on that, but my heart was in the brewing process. I started at the bottom, cleaning tanks and learning the equipment, but Dad gradually brought me into the real work, teaching me the recipes that had been passed down through generations, showing me how to coax the best flavors out of our ingredients. The brewery wasn't making us rich, but we were doing okay. Our golden ale had won some regional awards, and we had a loyal customer base. People would drive from 3 states away just to taste our beer. There was something about the flavor, complex, rich, with this subtle funkiness that you couldn't find anywhere else. That was our yeast doing its magic. Everything changed when Dad got sick. Cancer, the fast-moving kind that doesn't give you time to prepare. Within 6 months, he was gone, and suddenly I was the head brewer of a business that was drowning in medical bills and debt. Mom tried to keep things going, but she'd never been involved in the day-to-day operations. I was 26, terrified, and completely overwhelmed. I knew how to make the beer, but running a business? Managing suppliers, dealing with distributors, handling payroll? I was learning everything on the fly while also grieving my father and trying to keep our family's legacy alive. For 2 years, I threw everything I had into that brewery. I worked 18-hour days, slept on a cot in the office more nights than I can count, and basically sacrificed any semblance of a social life. My friends from college were getting married, starting careers, traveling the world, and I was elbow-deep in fermentation tanks, trying to keep a struggling business afloat. But here's the thing. I loved it. Even when I was exhausted and stressed and wondering if I was crazy for trying to save this place, I loved the work. There's something magical about brewing. You're literally taking simple ingredients and transforming them into something that brings people joy. Every batch was like a small miracle, and our yeast, our family's secret weapon, made every single beer special. The problem was money. Always money. Equipment needed repairs, suppliers wanted payments, and we were barely breaking even. I tried everything. Took out loans, ran promotions, even started doing brewery tours to bring in extra cash. Nothing seemed to be enough. That's when Mom made the decision that changed everything. She sat me down one evening, looking older than her 58 years, and said, "Emma, we've got an offer." It was from Titan Brewing Corporation. You know, one of those massive companies that's been buying up craft breweries all over the country. They wanted to purchase golden hops, and they were offering enough money to pay off all our debts and leave Mom with a comfortable retirement. But what about the brewery? I asked. What about our recipes? What about the yeast? Mom looked at me with these tired, sad eyes. Honey, they've promised to keep everything exactly the same. They want to maintain the Golden Hops brand, and they've specifically said they want you to stay on as head brewer. It's the best of both worlds. You get to keep doing what you love, but without all the financial stress. I should have known better. I should have trusted my instincts. But I was young and scared and honestly a little relieved at the idea of not having to worry about payroll every month. So I agreed. The transition happened fast. Titan sent in their team of consultants and efficiency experts, all wearing identical Navy suits and carrying iPads. They measured everything, analyzed every process, and took notes about our optimization opportunities. For the first few months, they mostly left me alone. I kept brewing the same recipes, using the same methods, maintaining the same quality. Our loyal customers didn't even notice the change in ownership. I started to think maybe Mom had been right. Maybe this really was the best of both worlds. Then Marcus Thompson arrived. Marcus was Titan's new regional production manager, a guy in his 40s with an MBA from some fancy business school and absolutely zero brewing experience. He had this condescending way of talking like he was explaining basic math to a toddler, and he seemed to think that running a brewery was the same as running any other manufacturing operation. Emma, he said during our first meeting, I've been reviewing your processes, and I have to say, there's a lot of room for improvement here. Your methods are, well, they're very traditional. Almost quaint. But if we're going to scale this operation and improve profit margins, we need to modernize. I tried to explain that our traditional methods were exactly what made our beer special. That our customers loved the authentic, handcrafted quality. That our yeast strain required specific handling procedures that had been perfected over decades. He waved me off. Look, I appreciate your passion, but passion doesn't pay the bills. We have shareholders to answer to, and they expect results. I'm bringing in some real brewing experts to help streamline your operation. The real brewing experts turned out to be a team of industrial brewers who specialized in mass production. They took one look at our small batch methods and started making recommendations that made my stomach turn. Shorter fermentation times. Artificial additives to speed up the process. Pre-packaged yeast cultures that would be more reliable than our family strain. This old yeast culture is a liability, said Jennifer Walsh, the team leader. She was examining our mother culture like it was a specimen in a lab. It's unpredictable, requires too much maintenance, and honestly, it's probably contaminated with wild bacteria. We can replace it with a commercial strain that will give you consistent results every time. I felt like someone had just suggested we replace my father's ashes with sand. That yeast culture has been in my family for over 80 years, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's what makes our beer unique. It's literally irreplaceable. Jennifer laughed. Actually laughed. Emma, you're being sentimental. All yeast is basically the same. The flavor differences you think you're tasting are probably just in your head. Trust me, our customers won't notice the difference. But I knew they were wrong. I'd grown up with this yeast, learned its moods and characteristics, understood how it responded to different conditions. It wasn't just ingredients. It was a living thing with its own personality. You couldn't just substitute it with something from a catalog. Over the next few weeks, I fought them on everything. Every shortcut they wanted to take, every corner they wanted to cut, every tradition they wanted to abandon. I felt like I was fighting for my father's memory, for my family's legacy, for everything that made our beer special. But I was just one voice against a corporation. Marcus made it clear that I could either get on board with the changes or find another job. And honestly, I was starting to think maybe I should find another job. This wasn't the brewery I'd grown up in anymore. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in November. I came into work to find Jennifer and her team already in the brewing room, preparing to dump out our mother culture and replace it with their commercial yeast. What are you doing? I asked, my voice coming out higher than I intended. We're implementing the new yeast protocol, Jennifer said matter-of-factly. Marcus approved it yesterday. Don't worry, we'll have the new culture ready to go by this afternoon. I watched in horror as she prepared to pour our 80-year-old family legacy down the drain. This living piece of history that had survived wars and depressions and countless other challenges, and she was about to destroy it like it was nothing. "Stop," I said, my voice shaking. "Please just stop. You don't understand what you're doing." Jennifer paused, looking at me with what I can only describe as pity. "Emma, I know change is hard, but this is for the best. You'll see, the new yeast will give us much more consistent results." "Consistent isn't the same as good," I said, feeling tears threatening to spill over. "Our customers don't want consistent. They want authentic. They want the beer that my great-great-grandfather would have made." "Your great-great-grandfather didn't have modern brewing science," Jennifer replied. "He was working with primitive methods because that's all he had. We have better options now." I stood there watching as she prepared to destroy something that meant everything to me, and I realized that this wasn't just about yeast. This was about respect. About understanding that some things are more important than efficiency and profit margins. About recognizing that craft and tradition have value beyond what you can measure in a spreadsheet. "Fine," I said quietly. "But I'm taking a sample home with me. For sentimental reasons." Jennifer shrugged. "Sure, whatever makes you feel better." I carefully transferred a portion of our mother culture into a small jar, my hands shaking as I sealed it. This might be the last living piece of my family's brewing legacy, and I was smuggling it out of our own brewery like some kind of refugee. That night, I called in sick and spent the whole day in my kitchen, carefully nurturing the yeast sample and trying to figure out what to do next. I felt like I was carrying the weight of 4 generations on my shoulders. The next morning, I went back to work, hoping against hope that maybe they'd changed their minds. But the new yeast was already in place, and Jennifer was excitedly explaining to Marcus how much more efficient the new process would be. I tried to make it work. I really did. For the next 2 months, I followed their new procedures, used their new ingredients, and watched our beer become something completely different. It still looked like golden ale, and it still had the same name on the label, but it wasn't the same beer. The complexity was gone, the subtle funkiness that made it special had vanished, and it tasted like, well, like every other mass-produced beer on the market. Our long-time customers noticed immediately. I started getting calls and emails from people who'd been drinking our beer for years, asking what had happened. "It doesn't taste the same," they'd say. "Did you change the recipe?" I had to lie and tell them we were still using the same methods, but inside I was dying. Every complaint felt like a personal failure, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. The final blow came during our quarterly review meeting. Marcus had called me into his office, and his expression was grimmer than usual. "Emma, I'm going to be straight with you," he said, not even bothering with pleasantries. "The numbers aren't good. Sales are down 30% from last quarter, and customer satisfaction scores are at an all-time low." I wanted to scream, "Because you ruined our beer." But instead, I just nodded and waited for him to continue. "Now, I know you've been resistant to some of our changes," he continued, "and I think that attitude might be affecting the quality of your work. You seem to be stuck in the past, unwilling to embrace modern brewing techniques." This was rich, coming from a guy who couldn't tell the difference between ale and lager. But I bit my tongue and let him keep talking. "So we've decided to bring in someone with more contemporary experience. Someone who understands that brewing is a business, not a hobby." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "We're letting you go, Emma. Effective immediately. Jennifer Walsh will be taking over as head brewer." I sat there in stunned silence. Jennifer Walsh, who'd been brewing for all of 5 years and thought yeast was just yeast. Jennifer Walsh, who destroyed our family's legacy and was now going to take my job too. "You're firing me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're restructuring," Marcus corrected, like that somehow made it better. "Your severance package is quite generous, and we'll provide excellent references for your job search." I looked at this man who'd never brewed a single beer in his life, who'd systematically destroyed everything my family had built, and I felt something inside me snap. Not break. Snap. Like a rubber band that had been stretched too far. "You know what, Marcus?" I said, standing up and straightening my shoulders. "You're right. I am stuck in the past. I'm stuck in a past where people cared about quality over quantity, where tradition meant something, where beer was more than just a product to be optimized." His face was getting red, but I wasn't done. "And you know what else? You're going to fail. You've taken everything that made this brewery special and turned it into generic corporate swill. Our customers aren't idiots. They know the difference between real craft beer and mass-produced garbage. You've destroyed something beautiful, and you don't even realize it. I walked out of that office with my head held high, even though inside I was completely falling apart. I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to the few employees who were still there from the old days, and drove home in a daze. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the jar of yeast I'd saved, and I made a decision. They could fire me, they could ruin our family brewery, they could destroy everything we'd built. But they couldn't kill the thing that made our beer special. Because I had it right there in my hands. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I was broke, unemployed, and watching from the sidelines as everything my family had worked for was systematically destroyed. But I was also planning. I spent hours researching small brewery startup costs, equipment suppliers, and legal requirements. I talked to other craft brewers, learned about crowdfunding, and slowly began to formulate a plan. It was crazy and risky and probably impossible, but it was also the only way I could think of to honor my father's memory and save our family's legacy. The idea was simple. Start my own brewery using our original yeast strain and recipes. But simple doesn't mean easy. I had no money, no equipment, and no business partners. What I did have was 80 years of brewing knowledge, a jar of irreplaceable yeast, and a burning desire to prove that tradition and quality still mattered. I started small. Really small. I converted half of my garage into a tiny brewing operation, bought used equipment with what little savings I had, and began experimenting with recreating our family recipes. The yeast culture was still healthy and active, and within a few weeks, I was producing beer that tasted exactly like the old Golden hops. But I couldn't just call it Golden hops. Titan owned that name now. So I came up with something new. Heritage brewing. Because that's what I was doing. Preserving heritage in a world that seemed determined to throw it away. My first batch was just 5 gallons. I gave samples to some of our old customers, the ones who'd been complaining about the changes at Golden hops. Their reactions were immediate and emotional. "This is it," said Pete Martinez, who'd been drinking our beer for 20 years. "This is what Golden hops used to taste like. Where did you get this?" When I explained what I was doing, he immediately offered to invest. Then his brother wanted to invest. Then their friends. Word spread through the local craft beer community like wildfire, and suddenly I had people offering money, equipment, and expertise. But I was still just one person with a garage brewery and a dream. I needed to think bigger. That's when I remembered something my father used to say. "Emma, people don't just buy beer. They buy stories. They buy tradition. They buy the feeling that they're part of something special." So I started telling my story. I created a simple website explaining the history of our yeast strain, the destruction of our family brewery, and my mission to preserve traditional brewing methods. I didn't mention Titan by name, but I didn't need to. The craft beer community is small, and word travels fast. The response was incredible. Orders started coming in faster than I could fulfill them. Beer bloggers wrote articles about the brave woman saving her family's brewing legacy. Local restaurants wanted to carry my beer exclusively. But the real vindication came 6 months later, when I heard through the grapevine that Golden hops was in serious trouble. Sales had continued to plummet, and they'd lost several major accounts. The beer just wasn't the same, and customers were abandoning the brand in droves. Jennifer Walsh had tried everything. Different yeast strains, recipe modifications, even bringing in consultants to help improve the flavor. But you can't replicate 80 years of evolution in a laboratory. Our family yeast wasn't just special because of its genetics. It was special because of its history, its adaptation to our specific brewing methods, its symbiotic relationship with our ingredients. Meanwhile, heritage brewing was exploding. Within a year, I'd moved out of my garage and into a real facility. I hired some of the former Golden hops employees who'd been laid off during Titan's restructuring. We were producing beer that consistently won awards and sold out as fast as we could make it. The local food and beverage magazine did a feature story comparing our beer to the new Golden hops. The tasting notes were brutal. Heritage Brewing's founder's ale demonstrates everything that made Golden hops special. Complex, nuanced, with a distinctive character that's impossible to replicate. The current Golden hops product, by contrast, tastes like any generic mass-market beer. That article got picked up by national publications, And suddenly we were getting orders from distributors across the country. I had to turn down business because we couldn't keep up with demand. But the sweetest moment came 2 years after I'd been fired. I was at a craft beer festival in Denver, sharing samples of our latest seasonal brew, when I saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Marcus Thompson, looking significantly less confident than he had in his corporate suit. He approached my booth hesitantly, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome. "Emma? I heard about what you're doing here. It's impressive." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering that day in his office when he'd told me I was too stuck in the past. "Thanks, Marcus. How are things at Golden Hops?" His face fell. "Actually, we're shutting down the operation. Sales never recovered after the changes, and Titans decided to discontinue the brand." I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for the end of my family's original brewery, but also a sense of justice. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "Look, Emma, I know I made mistakes," he continued. "I should have listened to you about the yeast, about the traditional methods. I thought I knew better, but I was wrong. It would have been easy to gloat, to tell him I'd told him so. But what was the point? The damage was done, and I'd already gotten my real revenge by building something better." "We all make mistakes," I said. "The important thing is learning from them." He nodded gratefully and moved on, but I could see the defeat in his shoulders. It wasn't personal anymore. It was just business, and his business had failed. That night, I called my mother to tell her about the encounter. She'd been following Heritage Brewing's success with pride and amazement, but she'd also been sad about the loss of Golden Hops. "You know what your father would say about all this?" she asked. "What?" "He'd say that the brewery was never really about the building or the equipment or even the name. It was about the beer, the tradition, the love that went into every batch. And you've kept that alive." She was right. Golden Hops the company was dead, but Golden Hops the legacy lived on in every batch I brewed with our family yeast. I'd saved the thing that really mattered. 3 years later, Heritage Brewing has become one of the most respected craft breweries in the region. We've won dozens of awards, been featured in national magazines, and inspired other small brewers to prioritize tradition over efficiency. But more importantly, we've created something that my father would have been proud of. A place where beer is made with love and respect for tradition, where quality matters more than quantity, where the story behind the product is as important as the product itself. I still have that original jar of yeast, carefully preserved in my refrigerator at home. It's no longer the only sample. I've propagated it into multiple backup cultures, but it remains the mother of everything we do. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, remembering my father and the lessons he taught me about patience, tradition, and the importance of preserving things that matter. The irony isn't lost on me that Titan Brewing Corporation thought they could improve on 80 years of tradition with a few months of corporate optimization. They had all the resources, all the expertise, all the modern equipment. But they didn't have the one thing that actually mattered: respect for the craft. In the end, that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, though I'll admit there was some satisfaction in watching them fail. Not even about beer, though I do love making it. It's about the importance of preserving the things that make us human. Our traditions, our crafts, our connections to the past. In a world that's increasingly focused on efficiency and profit margins, there's still value in doing things the old way. In taking time to do things right. In understanding that some things can't be optimized or streamlined or replaced with cheaper alternatives. My father's yeast culture is still bubbling away in my brewery, creating beer that tastes like it did when my great-great-grandfather first brought it to America. It survived wars and depressions, corporate takeovers and family tragedies. And it will continue to survive, as long as someone is willing to care for it and understand its value. That's my legacy now. Not just the beer, but the proof that tradition and quality can triumph over corporate greed and short-sighted thinking. That sometimes, the old ways really are the best ways. And every time I taste one of our beers, I can hear my father's voice. "Emma, this little culture has survived everything the world could throw at it. It's tougher than all of us combined." He was right. It is tougher than all of us. And so am I.